dark recesses of the dirty, run-down industrial zone on the bad side of town was an old factory that made cheap, foul-smelling dog food. The plant manager was Frank Bloom. He was the meanest man you could ever work for and a horrible miser. Frank would constantly bully and belittle the workers beneath him for the smallest things. Worst of all, he had been stealing money from the company for years. When one of the more brave employees, a man named Dan Gold, threatened to expose Frank, the manager became violent and beat Dan within an inch of his life in front of everyone. But Dan did not back down, and he proclaimed the incident would be Frank's downfall. No one else dared say anything about the abuse. The next day, when Dan came into work, he walked right up to Frank and let him have it. "Frank, you're a horrible person. I won't let you get away with any of this. I'm going straight to the union about you, and then you'll be finished." Frank was furious, but instead of attacking Dan as he had done before, he simply stormed away, fuming with anger. That night, after work, Dan clocked out and headed to his car to return home. Suddenly, he heard the echo of footsteps coming from somewhere in the parking lot. He turned, but no one was there. He pulled out his keys and began to unlock his car door. At that moment, a blunt object came down on the back of Dan's head, knocking him out cold. When he came to, Dan was back inside the dog food factory. He had a cracked skull and a terrible pounding headache. He looked about with blurred vision and found that he was up on the catwalk near the chute leading to the gigantic meat grinder, and there, standing above him, was Frank Bloom. Dan couldn't move. He looked down and saw that his hands and feet were tied together with duct tape. "Your service to the company is no longer needed," said Frank. "You're fired." At that moment, Dan watched as Frank lifted the big lever, activating the meat grinder. A terrible screeching sound was heard as the machine came to life. Terrified, Dan realized what was about to happen. "You're insane if you think you can kill me here," he cried out. "You'll never get away with this. I won't let you." Frank just laughed. "Oh, yes I will. No one will ever know. I'm going to turn you into dog food and feed you to my dog at home. There won't be any evidence left." Lying there on the catwalk, Dan could only watch helplessly as the man standing above him moved closer. Dan's eyes widened in terror. Then, in an instant, Frank Bloom lunged forward and shoved Dan down the chute and into the meat grinder. The next morning, the other employees noticed that Dan Gold, who was always on time, had not come into work. Everyone asked Frank where Dan was, but Frank didn't respond. He only turned and walked away, chuckling under his breath. As Frank had promised, he had killed Dan and turned him into dog food. Throughout the day, unknowing workers transferred the food into cans. After work, Frank took a case of the cans home. His huge black Rottweiler was there waiting for him, hungry for meat as always. Frank gleefully opened some of the cans and slopped the grayish mush into a big bowl. The drooling animal devoured it in an instant. Frank smiled with great satisfaction. He planned to feed this new batch of food to his pet until all the cans were gone. On Monday, Frank noticed that the dog was oddly quiet. Instead of barking and howling when he pulled into the driveway, it just waited silently at the window, staring at him. On Tuesday, the animal was acting even more strange. Walking in circles and grunting, it had the most peculiar look in its eyes, crazed and cold. It began glaring at him as if it hated the man. On Friday night, when Frank came home from work to feed the giant pet more of the food, it slowly approached the man and stood on the kitchen rug behind him. Frank tore open the very last can of dog food and dumped it into the bowl. But the dog did not seem interested. It just kept staring at him. It began snarling and baring its teeth, and suddenly the Rottweiler looked like a monster there before him. Frank shook his head. "You stupid dog! What's the matter with you?" He pointed to the bowl of slop. "Eat the food! Eat the food!" At that moment, the giant black Rottweiler sprang upwards and attacked, lunging directly at the man's fat neck. The dog's hideous maw closed around his throat in an instant, and Frank Bloom was pulled violently down to the kitchen floor, kicking and screaming. Several days passed. The police, after hearing reports of both Dan Gold and Frank Bloom having gone missing, they went to each of their houses. They never found any trace of Dan Gold, but when they arrived at the house of Frank Bloom, they discovered a gruesome and horrifying scene in the kitchen. a giant, overfed Rottweiler that had nearly completely devoured its owner.